Alright, Lego is back again with a mini project because I needed a break from bigger projects, which is a sentence I've spoken about before, but it happens. Big projects require breaks sometimes, and this is a small idea that I had quite recently, and I decided to go for it. So, what you're seeing here is me quickly tracing a Nebulon-B escort frigate from Star Wars, and I don't know if you caught it. I made a very quick little sort of storyboard there on the page before I started tracing to sort of see the composition I wanted to have, as well as what the amount of space and positions I had to work with was. Having done that, I traced the ship, and as you can see, I sacrificed a lot of detail in favor of getting the overall silhouette. So that's what you're seeing right now. I'm just removing a lot of the interior details and nuances from the ship. First of all, I just need the silhouette. If I need to make it fancy later, I can do that later. So having made the ship, which is arguably the easiest part, I sat down and made some silhouettes for the Kamino settlement that this ship is attacking, or at least was attacking. So I'm just having googled a few pictures of the Camino and Caminoian architecture. I'm making up some basic shapes to make the different discs and towers that seem to make up the majority of their above sea level facilities. So it's a bit like Bespin in that regard. So we got a lot of gray circular shapes, and then they have these tiny lights everywhere. So I just made that quick and easy by just making a stroke with a dash pattern in an appropriate color and distance, and that just works wonders. You don't need to look closely at them, but it gives the vibe very easily, very quickly. So I'm quite happy with that, and I'm just adding some basic nuances so it doesn't look so flat. And I plan on making a few of these just to have some variety. So having made the first one, I'm just making some different iterations of those, so I have something to populate the Camino facility with. Again, you probably know where this scene is going. This is from Star Wars: The Force Unleashed 2, when Starkiller, or his clone, arguably his clone, goes to assault the base to. Well, I'm not gonna spoil the story. Anyway, he ends up crashing the ship into the shield generator because that was the fastest, easiest way to do it. And so this is the scene I'm depicting. So I'm making up some more towers here in order to have a target for the ship to crash into. That's what happened. That's what's happening here. In terms of, I guess, style, this is fairly reminiscent of I guess, the alethiometer way back in the day in terms of how the assets here are created, just without the references this time. But it's a bit of a balance between making something that looks very good and looks good enough for what I need, because there's no need to go overboard with the details. I could add a lot of mesh gradients, I could add a lot of detail, grid, texture, I could do all sorts of stuff, but it wouldn't really matter in terms of like the purpose of the buildings. They just need to be there to populate the corner of the project. So now I'm just adding a few of those iterations together, trying to cluster them in a way that makes everything easily visible. I don't want to detract from the iconic silhouettes, and I don't want them to look too busy or too clumped together, but I'm trying to find a balance between having a good few sized buildings and, you know, not going overboard. Um, So now it's time to make the shield generator itself. I set out this real quick red framing here, so I had an idea of what my actual framing was going to be, limiting myself to everything within that frame being important. So I had a few different ideas of how I wanted the shield to look. I have a glass tutorial that pretty much applies to this. You can find it in the description below if you're curious, but I ended up not utilizing too many of those exact methods because this is not a complete circle and I did not need the granularity that the conical mesh gradient affords me. I could make do with a regular circular gradient just fine in this case. So I have the basic shield applied and it looks pretty good. So now it's time for the real exciting thing, which is how I'm going to make the crashing ship actually crash. First thing I did was make a clip group. I've gotten way better at those. Inserted a burning color scheme at the front and then, you know, nested that within the actual ship itself. Now, after that, I just made a rough outline, applied some watercolors, and then it's just tweaking the settings of those until it looked vaguely like something that I could call a fire. And a few different iterations of those. It's all about stacking. So you don't need one effect to look good. You just need one effect that looks good enough so that when you stack them together, using different gradients, different colors, different blurs, adding those together will give you a very comprehensive effect. So what you're seeing here is just a basic U shape with a mesh gradient applied, very hot at the front, almost white hot, and then the more classic yellow orange at the back. And having made that U-shaped fire tongue almost, I can just take variations of that, shape them, blur them, and just group them together in different fashions. And adding all those individually not great effects together really comes together and makes something greater. So it's not the quality of the effect, it's the quantity in some sense. Adding a couple of those together suddenly makes it look like there's a lot more going on, and it gives it a lot more depth, basically. So that's what you're seeing now, me trying to add some extras to it, and I didn't quite give up, but it took me a little moment to figure out how I could add that into the existing stuff. So just taking a few basic effects and colors, blurring them together, and just making them stack in an interesting way is enough to get about 60% of the way. The rest is, as you can see there, a very, very basic mesh gradient as the background, which really sells the idea that this thing gives off light. I use that to great effect in a couple of the Tomb Raider projects I've done recently as well, where an item seemingly gives off light to other surrounding objects and backgrounds. Mesh gradients are very great for that. And so, being pretty happy with this ship itself so far, it's time to add the text. I left myself a little window at the top of the screen to fill out some words, and that's what you're seeing right now. I made a boundary at the bottom to remember where the ship is and the shield, and my goal here was to just make a free form piece to take up that space at the top. I don't really do free form, freehand, whatever you want to call it, that often, but when I do, I always remember how satisfying it is to do, because it's a nice feeling of when, like me, you're used to working within boundaries and within frameworks, to suddenly be given the freedom of, here's a blank space, fill it out. No structure, no architecture, no restrictions on blah blah blah. You just fill out this space, go for it. It offers me a lot more freedom than what I'm used to, and it is by choice, of course. But it is nice to cut loose sometimes and just make something that fit whatever you want. No restrictions required. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm adding the text. I'm not going to spoil it right away, but yeah, it's a bit of a joke, honestly, in terms of what is happening on screen. But I found it funny, so I'm doing it for myself. Not a lot of color coding going on in this. It's a very simple phrase, so I'm just using the white as the cutouts, and then just regular red text as the contrast to the background. Normally I use a black and white scheme, but in this case I needed the dark background when I laid down the colors for the Kamino city, because as I had with the Dust project, I need a dark setting, and if I need a dark setting, I need a dark background from the start. Otherwise, the buildings are going to be way too bright and they'll stand out way too much. So that's why I made the background as one of the first things. And now I am just about done with the text. I made a backup, as you saw there, and then I made the destructive editing, cutting out the shapes that needed cutting, borrowed a couple of pieces I missed, and at this point I have the cut text. Now it's just a matter of adding some punctuation, which is a bit of an afterthought in terms of when I do these unstructured freeform pieces. Punctuation just tends to take up the space wherever there is space left. Instead of having the framework first and the sentence circles doing the acting as the boundary from the start, instead of the other way around. But now I'm just adding the dots to my text, which is really satisfying to do in a freehand project, because dots can just take up whatever space I need to within reason. So I can take up a lot of empty areas, and I can fill out some awkward holes wherever I find them. That's nice. And having done that, it's time to add the lines. And here the blessing is the fact that it's a very short quote. Well, not a quote, a short text. So shorter texts are easier to make fancy line play with. So here I'm acting up a bit with some tangent lines, which is, I think, a first for me. Yeah, pretty much a first for me. I'm not usually playing around with tangent lines unless I'm writing Gallifreyan 2, but in this case it just fit in, and otherwise there's not a lot going on with lines. It's a manageable level of line work, which is why I didn't need any text on screen to keep me occupied and help me remember what's going on. I had it all in my head because it was a pretty short sentence, and it was really easy to keep everything in its place. I didn't misplace any words or anything. It was relatively easy to keep everything in mind at all times. So fairly straightforward line work, and it's also nice sometimes to be able to connect things in ways that more structured sentencing can't or doesn't allow easily. I have a bit more freedom in just ending a line on nothing if I want to, and in general I can just go nuts. So that was fairly enjoyable putting that together, and I think that is the last line. Now I'm just adding some thickness adjustments in a couple of places. I'm not going to do any effects on this. I don't want the text to be fancy. I just want it to be straightforward. So this is my idea of straightforward. And now I'm just unionizing the different aspects together. I had an idea for color work in regards to the center wording. So that's why I'm making 4 different groups, as you can see there. And in reality, I only need two different groups. I want the surrounding text and I want some center text. And so I worked with a similar color scheme as the ship itself, nothing that stood out too much. And then I made this nicely contrasting blue as the centerpiece, you could say, where I tried my best to make a gradient that worked with me, going from the center words out to the surrounding text without it looking too jarring. And that's actually why I needed to borrow another backup of the text, because I actually needed to separate the lines in a different way than what I had done already. So that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing me trying to bridge the two color schemes across two different pieces of text. And I think I got away with it. It's not my best, but it got the job done. And you're not really scrutinizing those particular lines anyway. So I feel like it worked out. So this is pretty much the text. I'm just adding a little bit of a contrast there because the blue is not as contrasting as the yellow. But I think I'm done pretty much on this, and I'm just adding. It still looked a little bit bright, so I added some dark overcoats. I guess an extra dark shape on top, and now I tried with adding a little bit of extra debris to the side there, or maybe that's, I think in my head that actually represents Starkiller himself flying alongside. But I tried adding some extra debris off to the side using some similar examples as the dust project with the markers. But I mean, yeah, it worked, but it wasn't worth the effort to put those everywhere, because I needed to. I mean, I would have had to spray those around, and I think it would have been a bit too much. So now I'm just obscuring the base of the Kamino city, because I don't really have a base. It's just the city just stops in midair. So I'm trying to disguise that using some smoke out of nowhere. And then at a last resort, because I actually thought I was finished, but then I was like, wait, I should probably leave some environmental stuff going on. So there is a space battle going on. So I'm just adding in some quick turbo laser shots using some basic lightsaber effects. And so we had the green, and then I'm adding some red laser beams as well, and just putting a few of those in there at random, so that it just adds a little bit of environment to the whole thing, so it doesn't look as empty. And I think I got away with that as well, fairly quickly and cheaply. Um, this is the sort of thing you can just add on and on and on and on, and you can keep going infinitely. But I have to call a stop somewhere. The last thing I did was try and add some of the details back again, because it is a black ship in silhouette form, but it is on fire and it is crashing. So I thought maybe I could add in some details and keep the color scheme intact, so that I got something more going on at the ship. And so this is what I came up with, keeping the same color scheme at the front while suffering, or not suffering, fading to the traditional two color tone at the back. So I'm trying to keep my cake and eat it too, as it were, by having a two tone color be the black ship essentially, while still having the on fire effect at the front. So this is the quick little project I had. I think it was about 3 hours. Yeah, 3 hours, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm really happy with the fire effect, especially. It's a simple concept and a simple execution, but it looks like it has a lot of depth and it has a lot of nuance, I suppose. Um, Really happy with that. So I guess this is the project here. Thank you for watching.